Adjustments seem sustainable defensively, and that's what makes me start to believe in them a little bit more. The offensive stuff, like the offensive line is still good, even with injuries here or there. And AJ and Devontae, when they're healthy with Saquon, is going to be a problem. And Jalen Hurts is a franchise quarterback, if nothing else. He's not the superstar that we expected him to be. He's been better against the blitz this year.
Football 4 powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. That was my fault. Jalen Hurts, the superstar quarterback that we thought maybe, is he growing? Is he taking that step forward? He's one of the reasons why Dominic Foxworth thinks that the Eagles are a legit contender. Has Jalen Hurts turned that corner? What do the guys from the Inside the Birds podcast think? Geoff Mosher is here today for Football at 4. We'll get into that. No Landon Dickerson at practice today. Possible trade candidates and more on the Sports Bash. Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast and brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Geoff Mosher is here. What's up, Mosh? How are you, buddy?
Hey, Mike, what's going on? I got to say, I've been listening, as I usually do, in the middle of the day. And you and Josh have been having some really good and, I would say, thought-provoking conversations about the whole top 5 in the NFL and where teams belong and how hard it really is after maybe 1 and 2 to assign the next 3 or more teams and how they rank, given that everybody other than the Chiefs has a loss or more than a loss, and almost all of those teams that have 1 or 2 losses have sort of an inexplicable loss, like one of those how did you lose to that team type losses. The Ravens, in fact, their only 2 losses are almost inexplicable, right? And Detroit's loss was at home to Tampa Bay, where I think they only scored 16 points. And you look at how they're just waxing everybody right now offensively, you wonder, that's not even that great of a Tampa Bay defense that they couldn't score against. And of course, the Eagles had their losses against the NFC South teams. And you just go up and down and you say, and actually, I think it changes the conversation a little bit about the Chiefs, because I feel like the Chiefs conversation is, you know what, the team really isn't as good as it's been in the past. And, you know, the offense really isn't that good. This is kind of a vulnerable Chiefs team. But the fact is, they're 7-0, and they haven't had any of those trip-up losses that all the other good teams in the NFL have. So to not be that dominant and still be 7-0, which is so hard in the league, really goes to show you how impressive the Chiefs have been for a team that's quote unquote not as impressive as they've been routinely.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think a lot of people think, hey, if not for Mahomes, they're probably not. And then Josh brought up the argument, well, you know, we were talking about MVP earlier. I don't know if you heard that conversation. And he says, you know, he likes Allen because he's done more with less. And I said, well, really, Mahomes has done more with less, but his numbers don't suggest that. He's thrown more interceptions than he has touchdowns. But I think it's only because of Mahomes that we're putting the Chiefs in another category as that number 1 or 2 spot. It's because they have Mahomes, even though Mahomes hasn't played all that well, and that's a little odd.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I mean, if you look at the fact that, like, the two main contributors for the Chiefs over the last few weeks have had to be Kareem Hunt and Juju Smith-Schuster, you know, a guy who was signed off the street and another guy who's a receiver that couldn't make it on the Patriots. Is a pretty good example of what Patrick Mahomes is being asked to do with a supporting cast that just doesn't measure up to what he normally has and to what good teams typically have. So it's been quite impressive. And yes, you've seen a sort of decline in the statistical category for him, but I think that's explainable by what's around him. And the fact is he might be making a few mistakes that we don't normally see from him, but he's winning these games. He's figuring out a way.
Moshe, we take a look at Jalen Hurts, and it seems like, I don't know, is he turning a corner? When you guys talk about him, talk about his tape, and see what's happening, we've heard a lot of, we played a lot of audio today of people that are looking at this Eagles team a little differently all of a sudden. And one of the reasons we're like, look, they got AJ, they got Smith, they got Barkley, the line has been good. It's this guy that's holding them back. Well, is it because of him that they're taking a step forward?
Well, I mean, he's the quarterback. So when you win 3 games in a row and you do make, in the first 2 wins, the explosive kind of throws that he made to A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, you have to give him credit for that. Obviously the Bengals game, a little different, where you left that game saying, there he goes. He made a bunch of throws. You also used his legs, and obviously Kellen Moore's a part of that, using him as a design runner. So yeah, he's playing well. I mean, he played well against the Bengals, really well. It's really just 2 games ago against the Giants where we said, I know it says 10 of 13, and I know they scored 28 points, but there were a lot of plays left on the field there. So, hey, when you can struggle and win games, and then the next week go play a Bengals defense, that's not as good, but you make the throws that you're supposed to make as opposed to leaving them on the field. That, to me, I don't know if it's a full corner turn. I think we need to, anybody in this situation, you would need to see a little bit more, but it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah. So, one of the things, the one thing that I think is interesting here is the offense looked better. He only threw the ball 20 times, though. It's not like he threw 35 times and kind of led them. They still only threw the ball 20, but it looked more fluid. They just had more action in the offense, in the pass game, some of the routes that were being run. But I thought, it wasn't like they were getting the ball out. He was still holding the ball long. The pass protection, I think, was the star of the show that got underrated on maybe the day after evaluation.
100%. Definitely something that while watching the All-22, I came away really impressed by, especially Fred Johnson. Watching the game, it felt like they helped them in some certain areas, and I'm sure they did. I mean, you could see it, but not as much as I thought. There were plenty of one-on-one blocking opportunities against Trey Hendrickson. Hendrickson.
Hendrickson, yep.
Where he more than held his own, didn't need a chip, didn't need a running back on his side, and did a really nice job. In fact, on the touchdown to Devontae Smith, the long bomb, Hendrickson tried to kind of run around him, sort of take a wide angle to the quarterback, and he did a really good job of just riding him up the field, in which then Jalen Hurts then could climb the pocket, step up because he had so much protection. Jack Stoll also a one-on-one block on the other defensive end. And yeah, to your point, the Pat Pro was really good.
It really was. They used Jack Stoll, as you mentioned there. They kept him in. They constantly had extra guys, and that allowed, Hurts to hold the ball, make some progressions, fire some strikes, but him and A.J. Brown seemed to be on the same page. And I thought that was another underrated thing when you look back at the game a second time was the first time, Smith had the big touchdown. He led the team in receptions and yards, but A.J. was neck and neck with him. He just didn't have the touchdown, but he had some big separation and some big plays, and that's where this offense really seems like, okay, now it can take that next jump. If you can get some fluidity with AJ, and then that allows a lot more coverage changes by the other team. And it's like, if you're going to take him away, we'll go to him. If you're going to take him away, we'll go to him. And that's where I think for the first time it felt like that was a real possibility.
Yeah, I feel like after watching the All-22, that ball distribution and attacking the intermediary levels of the field, and intermediate doesn't have to mean like 5 to 10 yards. I mean, the first pass to A.J. Brown was, I believe, 28 yards on sort of a deep dig, and it was really between 2 linebackers in a zone. So it was the type of throw that sometimes we said, Jalen's not seeing that throw. He's not making that throw. It's across the middle. It's between the numbers, and he did make that throw. There weren't an abundant number of those kind of throws, but there were some, and that's, again, another step in the right direction. And that also was helped, as you mentioned, by the pass pro and his ability to kind of have a clean pocket and see what's around. And we know that in the first few weeks, pass protection had its struggles. There were some injuries. I think also they saw some more exotic defensive coordinators who were putting more guys at the line of scrimmage to try to break down the Eagles' protection, and successful with it. Todd Bowles, I mean, he wakes up out of bed doing that. The Atlanta, Raheem Morris, defensive coordinator, did some things against him as well. The Giants do that kind of stuff. So I think when we talk about like really turning the corner, we'll have to see as the weeks go on when they play somebody who's a little bit more known for creativity and spicing some things up front. Lou Anarumo kind of coached that game like he was afraid of his own personnel, which I don't blame him for. I mean, they validated it, but he didn't do a whole lot of stuff to try to confuse the quarterback or the offense.
Geoff Mosher, Football 4 from the Inside the Birds podcast. Yeah, I mean, I listened to a little Q&A, and they were talking about it almost felt like Jalen heard the noise, and that Cincinnati almost wasn't prepared for how good he was going to perform.
I think that Jalen's point in the press conference about I think someone asked him about, sort of seizing the moment of going up against a quarterback like Joe Burrow, and even though they don't play against each other technically, just how they share the field and the spotlight. And he talked about the high standard that he set for himself. It did feel like Jalen went into that game. I don't know if it was just hearing the noise, but sort of thinking, we know this game got flexed right out of its original spot. We know these teams are not maybe what everybody wants them to be. And I know that people are criticizing our offense, but I'm here to show you that I can play this game, and I'll show you.
All right, yeah, and by the way, he played probably his best game, both running and throwing. I mean, he made some plays with his legs, which we haven't been seeing nearly as much as well. And I think, the big thing was he trusted the guys in front of him. He trusted some guys. He took some big throws to Calcaterra. He trusted the pass. He wasn't getting out of the pocket like we've seen. So it was a complete growth of a game there for Jalen Hurts as well. What's up with Goddard in terms of his return? Is there a possibility that he's back this week? And if so, what is Calcaterra? Does he have a role moving forward with a Goddard? Because those two guys are both. Well, Goddard's more of a complete tight end. Calcaterra more for receiving. Stoll more for blocking.
Yeah, but well, first of all, to answer your first question, we'll wait and see when the injury report comes out. I don't think it's come out yet unless you've seen it, if they're able to get him back on the practice field. I had a feeling that they might this week be able to get him out, only because they didn't put him on IR when he first got hurt. So if you thought he was going to miss 4 games, you would have put him on IR, and this would be game number 3. So I thought that maybe that would mean that there's a chance that they felt he could get back this week. So we'll have to see when what the injury report says there. And even if it's not today, could be tomorrow. Sometimes they practice in pads on Wednesdays. And if they're going to do that, it's probably not the best day to get Goddard out there on the practice field when he's nursing a hamstring. So we'll see as the week goes on.
Yeah, I haven't seen whether he was – I haven't seen him out. I know Landon Dickerson was not on the practice field today. He was not in uniform. So he was out. They had Steen playing left guard today, and Becton is back at right guard. And, this goes to the offensive line and just the way that they continue to be able to get this thing up to speed. It is really, I think – I don't know do we take it for granted?
Sometimes, they're well coached, they're well developed. They're also, when you have a 3rd round pick like Tyler Steen, who's on the bench, that's better than most teams that can't even pull a 3rd rounder off the bench. So when you hit on a 7th rounder like Mailata, it's a really great advantage.
Well, and that's an interesting point. Like, you take a guy in the 3rd round, most teams need that guy to play and be like one of their starters. The Eagles take them for depth, and I think that's where some of these teams, like, they just don't. Is it that they don't value it? I don't know. What's the way? They just don't value adding offensive linemen that high.
Yeah, which is strange because the league is full of teams that you would think would be a lot better if they just had a better offensive line, and yet teams don't seem to incentivize it as much as the Eagles do. And then even taking a chance on, Mekhi Becton and thinking he can play guard and having the infrastructure and the coach of Jeff Stoutland to be able to make that transformation. I don't know that if Mekhi Becton signs with the Jacksonville Jaguars in the offseason, they say, we want you to play guard, that the transition goes the same way. I hate to pick on the Jaguars. I was just really naming a team that's not doing well right now. But that was just my point, is that this is not like this is not a first rodeo, right, for Jeff Stoutland. We've seen him be able to do this before.
I want to get your thoughts on as we look at this defense. I saw an article today that basically listed one player that each team should trade for. The guy that they had for Philadelphia was Joey Jewell, the linebacker who played for Vic Fangio in Denver. And then my thought was, he might be better than the 2 guys you have, but much like, because I saw another article that suggested Buda Baker, and I'm thinking he might be better than the 2 guys you have. But are you bringing in a guy to replace any of those 4 players, the 2 safeties or the 2 linebackers?
Yeah, probably not. First of all, if you're Howie, you're like, I've tried to do this like the last few years, sort of bringing in an aging veteran from somewhere. Not that Jewell's that old, but, Buda's been in the league for quite a while, and try to acclimate him into my either offense or defense, and it just has not worked well. Jay Ajayi worked well, but that's, we're we're going on 7 years since that happened. So I don't really know, to your point, that those guys come in and play so significantly better than what you're getting at linebacker and safety now that it's worth giving up something for.
It's
also not a position you normally, obviously we're going to give up something. Pass rusher, I think, would be the area you're looking
and that's the thing, so like we said, okay, if you brought Buda Baker in, is he's better? Probably, but is he replacing? You're probably not rocking that boat. Same with linebacker. I guess the one spot would be an edge rusher, but like whose playing time was getting cut into at this point? I guess Huff is the guy, but are you willing to eat that salary for at least the first year of it and just say, hey, we'll revisit this next year?
Well, I think you could you can probably take a few snaps away from Brandon Graham and say that's fine because he's playing more than we expected him to play.
I was surprised. He played the least amount of snaps of the edge guys this week. I was a little surprised by that.
He did, though. That was a little surprising, yeah, because Nolan Smith is starting to play a little bit better.
All right, so are we at the point then, Moshe?
Mm-hmm.
They had 13 sacks 2 weeks. They had 1 last week. They had 7 rush last week. Are we at the point where if it's 3rd down and 9 in a key game that we feel like they got enough?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that yet, especially if you're playing a team with a really good offensive line, which, as you get deeper into the season and then you get into the playoffs, you'll probably see a few of those. So I think that you can never have too many good pass rushers. You just don't want to get into a situation where it's Robert Quinn redo, where you're just getting a guy who's kind of a spare part and had a couple of seasons ago and hoping that he's better, and adds to you. You'd probably want somebody, if you're going to take snaps away from a Sweat, from Sweat, Huff, or Smith, you want to have a guy who's got a proven record. Like if the Browns want to not part with Garrett, but the other guy, Zadarius Smith, right?
Yep,
or something like that. Or if the Jaguars want to trade one of their 2 passers, well, they're really not going to trade Trayvon Walker, but maybe Josh Hines. I don't know what his contract situation is. I'm just throwing out names. But, I would think you'd want somebody with a little bit of control and a little bit of youngness and not sort of the scrap heap guy.
Mike Lombardi was on his podcast, the GM Shuffle, the other day. He said something I think that stood out because Sirianni talked about it today. He was asked about that. If I said, do the Eagles come off to you as a tough team?
Lately, I'd say tougher the last week or two than what you saw in the first 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, I don't question. Out of athletes. I think sometimes.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about questioning I'm just saying, like, Detroit beats the crap out of you. Like, they beat you up. And Lombardi was suggesting, like, the Eagles just beat them up. Like, the Bengals. Like, the Bengals just are not a tough team. Like, they just, and the Eagles were tough. They out-physicaled them. And I'm thinking, that's interesting. Like, one of the things I like about Detroit is I feel like they kick your butt. We hear the stat, like the team that plays the next week after they've played Detroit, they lose the next week because they got beat up. And Sirianni did kind of talk about that today, like, hey, the toughness of the team. And like do we think of this Eagles team as like this physical team that beats you up?
I think in some sense, I think they're a massive team. I mean, you've got a massive offensive line, and everybody always says mass kicks ass, right? So that helps. And then when you do go and establish your ground game and you let those big guys kind of lather up and start run blocking, sure, you definitely see an element of toughness there. We know Lane Johnson's a warrior. We know how big Landon Dickerson is and how big Jordan Mailata is, and even Mekhi Becton, right? And then on defense, there's a violence that Jalen Carter plays with. I mean, his hand usage when he bullies people. I think Josh Sweat, he may not be the pass rusher that he used to be, but he's still a physical player. I think they're a physical, tough team in the trenches.
Which is good.
Areas,
but that's the spot you
might not say that, though. Yeah.
That's the spot, though, where you want to be they physically beat you up. And that's where when, I hear Lombardi say that, and then I heard Sirianni was talking about it a little bit today. I tuned into the presser right as he was answering the question. So I don't know what the question was, but I did hear him, and I haven't seen the transcript yet, so I haven't got that. But I was thinking, like, at the end of the day, that's when I start to believe in you as a team. Are you tough? Are you able to beat teams up? Are you able to physically kind of impose your will on them? And that's when I think people start buying into you.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would agree with that, but I would also say that I think that you're a lost cause if you're not tough in the trenches. Like, if you're not a good team in the trenches and tough, then you're a lost cause. But I think what separates the elite teams is the ones that can also be tough outside the trenches, or the great defenses. The Bears are not an elite team, but they have a very, very good defense. And they got hard hitters from the linebacker to the corner to the safety level. Jalen Johnson is probably going to be an all-pro corner, but he's tough too. Jaquan Brisker will hit you. And I think the Eagles have started to plant the seeds of becoming a tougher back end. I think it's very fair to say they have not been very tough on the back end in quite a while.
Yep.
Zach Bowen plays physically. N'Kobe's getting there. I wouldn't quite call him that way, but I mean, Quinyon Mitchell to me is a cornerback who likes to play physically and didn't have to do it a whole lot in college playing off coverage, but we saw him 2 weeks ago put a really nice jam on Malik Neighbors and then jam him again, almost illegally, but hey, he did it, right? And then you're starting to see Cooper DeJean fly to the ball and make tackles, and
his ability,
his nose in there.
His ability, one of the things Jason Kelsey brought this up. He said the zone outside run killed them against the Falcons, and the Eagles have kind of cleaned that up. And I think one of the big things is Cooper's ability to tackle is underrated. I mean, because you had so many missed tackles from that spot.
Yep. So, in the first 3 weeks, you would say, man, this team really lacks toughness outside of the defensive line. They missed tackles. They one-arm tackle. They almost look like they're allergic to getting the ball. The receivers, they don't block well on screens, and that's still kind of an issue. Yeah. But you're starting to see the seeds being planted in the back end of this defense of eventually formulating an identity of toughness from top to bottom. It's not there yet. It's getting better, but I think that they're getting there.
All right, Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com. Get it on all podcasting platforms. Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash. If you could switch Sirianni for Peterson, would you do it?
No.
Like Nick better. Listen,
Peter.
Peterson's back in town. You get a little.
Who knows?
This town's known for a little nostalgia from time to time.
Yes, they are. I hear Buddy Ryan is still a very popular head coach around these parts.
All right, Moshe. We'll catch up with you on Monday.
All right, my friend. Take care.
Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast here on the Sports Bash Live 97.3 ESPN.